Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the profound loss felt across New England following the recent shootings at Brown University and at the home of an MIT professor in Brookline, Massachusetts. I extend my deepest condolences to the families and loved ones of those lost. Their names are Ella Cook of Alabama, who was a sophomore at Brown, Muhammad Aziz Umerzakov, a U.S. dual citizen from Uzbekistan who was in his first semester at Brown, and Professor Nuno Loureiro, a prominent physics professor at MIT. I ask that we hold in care everyone who has been injured or affected. This kind of violence has no place in our communities. Too many lives have been lost to gun violence, and the toll continues to grow. Honoring those we've lost means more than remembering their names. It means caring for one another and expecting thoughtful, responsible action that helps prevent this kind of harm, including common sense safety measures and access to mental health care. May we hold these families in light, support one another in our grief, and continue working toward safer communities for all. On today's episode of Notable New England, I have Brian Earl, the host of the Christmas Past podcast, here to talk about Christmas Past, his latest book, and some New England Christmas memories. Brian grew up here in Massachusetts. It'll be an interesting and festive episode, and you'll learn some interesting facts about the holiday. Stay tuned. Hello, lovely listeners, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Notable New England. I'm your host, Gretchen B. If you are new here, welcome. I'm so glad that you could join us. I've got a really cool episode today. I'm going to be sitting down with Brian Earl, who is the host of the very popular podcast, Christmas Past. Brian is originally from Stoughton, Massachusetts, though these days he resides in sunny California. He's going to tell us all about his podcast, his new book called Of Christmases Long, Long Ago, Surprising Traditions from Christmas Past, and some interesting stuff you may not have known about Christmas. Before we get to my conversation with Brian, let's dig into some Wicked Light Bites, community-oriented stories and happenings from each New England state. The Roger Williams Zoo in Providence, Rhode Island is opening its doors for free to members of the Brown University community after the tragic shooting that claimed the lives of 2 students and injured 9 people. Brown University students, staff, and faculty, plus one of their guests, can receive complimentary entry to the zoo to interact and engage with the animals now through January 4th. The goal of the free admission is to provide a place of refuge for the community. Stacy Johnson, executive director of the zoo, says, quote, "Green space and being within nature remind us of who we are and how we should feel. We want to make Roger Williams Park a place where people can gather and feel welcomed," end quote. Information for this item comes from James Rojas at WBZ News Radio 1030. The Boston Public Library has released its list of the 10 most checked out books for 2025. Melissa Andrews, the BPL's chief of collection management, says, quote, "The most borrowed titles of 2025 span a mix of genres, settings, and storytelling styles, yet they share one clear thread: new releases from authors building stronger connections with readers. This shows that readers continue to seek out about stories offering both familiarity and connection, returning to worlds and voices they love while discovering something new that grows and evolves with them. End quote. In 2025, the Boston Public Library lent 7.5 million physical and digital items, welcomed more than 3.2 million people to its locations throughout Boston's neighborhoods, and signed up 129,745 new library card holders. The top 10 most checked out books were Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, Happy Place by Emily Henry, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingslover, The Wedding People by Allison Esbach, Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, The Women by Kristen Hanna, Shield of Sparrows by Devney Perry, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, and Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. Information for this item comes from Annie Jonas at boston.com. Do you have an adorable pet, or have you captured some great wildlife photos in New Hampshire this past year? If so, you can enter New Hampshire Magazine's second annual Pets and Wildlife Photo Contest. You can submit up to 3 photos of your pet or a wild animal that was taken in New Hampshire. New Hampshire Magazine's panel of judges, who are all professional photographers, will choose the winners and honorable mentions, and they'll be featured in the March-April 2026 edition of the magazine. The editor's pick first and second place winners will win a cash prize. Submit your photos by Monday, January 5th, 2026. Again, the photos must be taken in New Hampshire. For more information on submitting photos, visit nhmagazine.com/photo-contest, and that will be in the show notes for your convenience. Information for this item comes from New Hampshire Magazine. An anonymous $100,000 gift was made to the Maine Community Action Partnership, and the gift will help about 285 Maine families with emergency heating this winter. The gift was inspired by a Giving Tuesday campaign by the Bangor Daily News, Pulse Marketing Agency, and community banking leaders raising money for heating support and for local reporting. 83 Bangor Daily News donors also contributed to a $5,000 for dollar match. Combined with the anonymous donation, about 300 Maine families will receive support. Maine Community Action Partnership's Managing Director Victoria Forkas says, quote, "For many Maine families, emergency heating support can truly mean the difference between getting through the winter safely or facing a real crisis," end quote. Information for this item comes from Annie Rupertus of the Bangor Daily News. A local institution in Newport, Vermont, is celebrating 50 years in business. The Pick and Shovel's motto is, quote, "If we don't have it, you don't need it," end quote. The store is run by Greg and Chris Hamblett, 2 brothers. Greg started working in the store when he was 13, and his dad owned the store. The Pick and Shovel opened in 1975. During that time, there weren't really any department stores in the area. The building the store is housed in is on Coventry Street in Newport, Vermont, and you can find anything from Vermont maple syrup to steel-toed boots, a new toilet, or even a reverse osmosis system for maple sugaring season. There's also ice cream and a laundromat. The Pick and Shovel is competing with the big box stores, but Greg Hamblett says nothing beats the one-stop shop and that he caters to the community and offers products people in the community want but can't get anywhere else. He says, quote, "The moment you walk through the door, we've got 10 people ready to help you and find things and try to offer a friendly hometown feel," end quote. He also thinks his dad would be proud to know that the store is still going strong today. Information for this item comes from Sophia Thomas at WCAX3. If you were a fan of going to shows at the Meadow in Hartford, Connecticut, get ready because it's coming back. Well, the name, that is. Hartford, Connecticut's Xfinity Theater is rebranding as the Meadows Music Theater, a nod to its former name. The venue is owned by Live Nation. There was no reason given as to why it is returning to its former name. All social media sites and the venue's website have been updated with the Meadows Music Theater name. 2 shows are already booked for next year so far, and they include MGK and Riley Green. Information for this item comes from NBC Connecticut. Up after the break, I'll be talking to Brian Earl, who grew up in Stoughton, Massachusetts, and who is the host of the very popular podcast Christmas Past. Brian is also the author of 2 books about Christmas. The newest book, titled Of Christmases Long, Long Ago, Surprising Traditions from Christmas Past, having hit the shelves just recently. You're listening to Notable New England. Are you still scratching your head about the perfect gift to give someone in your life who loves New England? Well, first, I'd encourage you to listen to my last episode, which featured New England gifts from New England companies that help keep your shopping dollars in your community. And another idea? Gift a Notable New England Patreon subscription to someone dear. Not only will they get early, ad-free access to episodes, but depending on the level you purchase, there are other cool perks like Notable New England merch and more. You can gift a membership for as little as 1 month or all the way up to a year. It's your call. Plans start at just $2 a month. What an easy, inexpensive, and fun stocking stuffer for the person in your life who loves storytelling, learning about local community members, and all things New England. Visit patreon.com/notablenewengland/gift. That's patreon.com/notablenewengland/gift. Or check the show notes and simply click on the link. Happy holidays to you and yours. If Notable New England has brought you a story you enjoyed, learned from, or shared with someone else, I'd love to ask a small favor. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. It takes less than a minute, and it has a real impact. Those stars help new listeners find the show and help keep this community continuing to grow. Notable New England exists to amplify the people, places, and stories that make our region so special. Your review directly helps those stories reach more ears. And if you know someone who loves New England or great storytelling, sharing the podcast with them is one of the most meaningful ways that you can support the show. Thank you for being here and for helping Notable New England grow. Your support truly matters. I'm delighted to have Brian Earl, the host of the very popular podcast Christmas Past, on the show today. Brian has been hosting Christmas Past since 2016. and it is one of the longest-running Christmas podcasts. Christmas Past explores the fascinating stories behind our favorite holiday traditions. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, and of course, I am going to link it in our show notes, so you can just go there and click. Brian is also an accomplished author of 2 books, Christmas Past, The Fascinating Stories Behind Our Favorite Holidays Traditions, and his newest book of Christmases Long, Long Ago, Surprising Traditions from Christmas Past. Brian also grew up in Massachusetts, though now he is on the West Coast. I'm excited today to talk with him about his podcast, his latest book, and some New England Christmas memories. Welcome to the podcast, Brian.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It is absolutely my pleasure to have you here today on the podcast. So you are originally from Massachusetts, now living in California, and you host one of the longest running Christmas podcasts, Christmas Past. Can you share a bit about your New England background and what inspired you to create the podcast?
Sure. Well, I can take the second part first. The inspiration behind the podcast was basically that I was hoping a podcast like Christmas Past already existed. And when it turned out that none such did, I decided to try to make it myself. So this was back in 2015, right around maybe September. That's when I start getting into the Christmas spirit. And I was listening to a lot of NPR style podcasts back then, like Planet Money and Freakonomics. And I said, oh, I wonder if there is that but Christmas, something that treats Christmas with through a lens of just curiosity and fascination and wants to turn over rocks and kind of see little hidden connections and really tell a story. Because, you know, after you've celebrated your 30th or 40th, or in my case now even 50th Christmas, you're doing the same things over and over again and realize at some point that you're carrying on these generations old narratives while being barely aware of their starting chapters. Everyone loves to put up a Christmas tree, but have you ever stopped to think, why is there a cut down tree in my living room? Why am I drinking this stuff that's cream and eggs and spices? And why do I only do it for 4 weeks out of the year? For every one of those traditions, there's a story. And I really wanted to dive in deeper to it. I will say that my New England roots probably influenced that to some level. You know, I grew up just south of Boston in a town called Stoughton, Massachusetts, and then lived in the city in Jamaica Plain for a while before moving back to the suburbs. And I think that growing up in New England gives you a certain experience of Christmas that you can't get elsewhere. Even though things have changed weather-wise, I have seen my fair share of white Christmases, or at least Christmas seasons where there was white before or after Christmas. And more than that, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And that too is a particular brand of Christmas. Every child knows what it's like to not be able to sleep the night before Christmas, but only kids like me know what it's like to not be able to sleep the night before Christmas because you hope that Santa has brought you a Teddy Ruxpin or Transformers or something like that. I have so many memories of waking up on Christmas morning and wanting to go out and meet all the other kids on the cul-de-sac and look at our Tyco race cars or whatever it was, but it being too cold and snowy to do so. So I think, you know, from all of that, it sort of formed my Christmas personality, if you like, if that's even a thing, with a great assist from my mother and my family, who celebrated Christmas as wholeheartedly as any family can. So, yeah, I think all of those kind of converged at a point where I was ready to try something creative for Christmas. That was back in 2015. And so, yeah, I had to contend with the fact that what I was trying to do was mimic the sound of an NPR style news piece, knowing full well that I am neither a journalist nor any kind of scholar. I'm not an historian of Christmas. I'm just someone who had a fairly clear idea of what I wanted this thing to sound like, and more importantly, what I wanted people to feel like when they listened to them, would listen to the episodes, that is. And so that first year, I gave it a try. And I accepted the fact that with a Christmas podcast, people are going to care about it for only a few weeks out of the year. But then a funny thing happened. It just started growing in ways that I couldn't have imagined, including the book deals and TV appearances and other things like that. Here I am now getting ready to start my 10th season of the podcast.
That is wonderful to be celebrating 10 years of the podcast. Congratulations on that. Now, do you still have family in Massachusetts? And if so, do you get back to this area to visit much?
Yes, so I'm from a large family. My mother was one of six children. My father was one of five. I'm one of five. And I grew up with lots of cousins and aunts and uncles and later on nieces and nephews around. My Christmases were very densely populated because my whole family lived within a 20-minute drive of one another. So most of my family is still back in Massachusetts. We get out from time to time. It's hard now that I'm dad to a 5-year-old and I live on the other side of the country. And recently there was a pandemic and all of that. But we do try as much as we can to have a good old-fashioned New England Christmas when we can.
I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about the difference between Christmas time in California versus Massachusetts or New England. I am born, raised, and reside in New England. Of course, I have traveled to other places to visit, but, I've never experienced a West Coast Christmas. So I'm kind of curious about the differences. And does it make you sort of miss the New England style Christmas that we all are sort of accustomed to? And, I always think about like the Norman Rockwell scene of, the snow and the Christmas trees. And, I'm thinking on the West Coast, it's got to be quite different because, of course, you're living in a warmer climate. And, for somebody like me who's lived here all my life, I'm thinking, oh, my goodness, how strange it would be to, have it be like 70, 80 degrees on Christmas when we're so used to it here. Maybe not so much anymore due to the, weather changes and whatnot. But, thinking of like the quintessential, snowy Christmas and ice skating and all of that kind of fun stuff.
Well, on the one hand, it's a little strange because, like you said, the quintessential Christmas is the snow-capped one with the white church in the center of town and all of that kind of thing. And out here, those symbols are still part of Christmas too. It's just that they're so out of place. So I just this morning went up to the Starbucks and they have all of the little snowflake decals on the windows, and it makes no sense because it's 65 degrees here today in the end of November. Some of it just feels very, very out of place. It's almost like we're seeing references to something that happens elsewhere, but it's just happening in our own environment. The other thing is there are regional traditions. We decorate the palm trees out here with Christmas lights and things like that. There are a lot more Christmas traditions that you can celebrate outdoors. So, we do pedicab rides in our town through our town. Our town is a neighborhood of San Jose called Willow Glen, and we really do up Christmas, so much so that people come from all over to see the Christmas light displays. And a little cottage industry of tours through the neighborhoods have cropped up. And that's the kind of thing you can just do any night of the year. You might have to put on a light jacket, but you'll be fine.
Your new book of Christmases Long, Long Ago, Surprising Traditions from Christmas Past just came out recently. Can you tell us about it and what sparked the idea?
Well, I was connecting some dots that I've been making over the last 9 seasons of the podcast. The first is that Christmas is constantly reinventing itself. And it sounds like a funny thing to say for something that's so steeped in tradition and is based in a, 2,000-year-old religious story. You would think that it's a pretty steady thing, and maybe just small details change from time to time. But no, the story of Christmas is that the one thing you can rely on is that it never stops changing. The other thing is that Christmas as an observance on December 25th is something that we've been doing since the 4th century, 336 to be exact, which means, by the way, that we are about to celebrate Christmas number 1689 through history. Now, if you think, like you were just talking about, making a picture in your mind of Christmas, what are the things that you think of? You might think of things like Christmas lights, Santa Claus, presents under the tree. All of those things were added to Christmas about 200 years ago. They've only been with us for the last couple hundred Christmases. Even the Christmas tree is only a couple hundred years older than that. So you think, most of the Christmases throughout history, some 1,000 or more Christmases throughout history, didn't include any of those things that you think of when Christmas comes to mind. So the question then is, what did they include? What did Christmas look like? What did people do? How did they celebrate? I wanted to know, and I thought others might too, and that was the impetus for the book. I just dived right in.
During your research for the new book, what were some of the most surprising things you discovered?
I think there is an idea that Christmas today has been so commercialized and so secularized. And a long time ago, it must have been more religious, must have been more pious. People must have been more well behaved and so on. Exactly the opposite is true. If you were to ask me to describe Christmases before the 19th century, I would simply say drunk and disorderly. That's the basic vibe with them. Because there was a time when people were more pious and devout and austere. That was Advent. That was the period leading up to Christmas. By the time Christmas came along, all of that self-restraint had worn off, and it was time to cast all of that aside and misbehave in ways large and small. Also, because again, Christmas is on December 25th. We don't know exactly why, but we can probably guess that it was just another example of these midwinter festivals that happened around the solstice. And when cultures adopted it, they said, oh, sure, it's one of those. Our culture's been doing that for generations. We had Saturnalia, Dies Natalis Solis Invicti. We had the Calends. We had Bacchanalia. Yeah, it's one. We got it, right? We're going to get wasted. We're going to dance up a storm. We're going to gamble. We're going to do all kinds of things like that. And I think everyone who researches Christmas even a little bit has heard stories about how the Puritans wanted to ban it for reasons you're saying, well, there's nothing about this in the Bible about celebrating Christmas. And so for that reason, we think it ought not to be celebrated. But if you dive in a little bit more, and I include some of this in the book, puritanical thinkers like Philip Stubbs and Reason Mather were writing that that during Christmas time, it was the 12 days of Christmas meets the seven deadly sins. They talked about how murder rates increase, people drunken in the streets, street fights, increases in prostitution, gambling, theft, and destruction, and things like that. The other surprising thing about Christmas is that traditions were hyper local. You think most of the traditions that we celebrate, again, there are regional differences, but it's basically the same. We all do it the same way. That really wasn't possible until the 19th century, when you had a mass media that could propagate a certain image of Christmas, when you had advanced transportation systems through the railway to sort of move things around. People could travel, information could travel, goods could travel. Prior to that, most traditions tended to stay local to where they were. The Christmas tree, for example, was just a local German tradition until an image of it was published widely in 1851 in Godey's Women's Magazine. Then they became a fashion trend all throughout the United Kingdom. So a lot of the traditions, when you say, what did Christmas look like? The first question that I would ask is, well, where and when are you talking? So in the book, I describe these traditions that you'd find just off the coast of Scotland, or other ones that you would find just in Greece. And a lot of them died out before they had a chance to merge in with the rest of Christmas.
Interesting. Now, you also wrote Christmas Past, the fascinating stories behind our favorite holiday traditions. How does that book differ from the new book?
Well, the differences between the old and the new. So the first book was me telling the backstories to Christmas traditions that you're already familiar with. Whereas the new book is really talking about Christmas traditions you've probably never heard of.
I think a lot of what I hear about Christmas today is that it is so commercialized. It's become so commercialized. And I'm just curious a little bit about the differences between Christmas now versus then. Was it commercialized back then at all? I'm talking about, with the advent of, say, department stores and things of that nature. Is that sort of when the tides had changed, or, is that a relatively new thing? I'd love to hear some more about your thoughts on that.
Well, whenever people say Christmas has gotten more commercial, my response is always, of course, we've become more commercial. It would be weird if it were the opposite. It is to be expected. And in fact, a lot of that commercialism has affected the way that we celebrate Christmas. And I think on the one hand, that's obvious enough. And on the other hand, we can look at when we celebrate Christmas. So I was talking before about how all of that restraint during Advent broke at Christmas time. That's because the Christmas season began on Christmas Day. and lasted until January 6th, the 12 days of Christmas. Nowadays, the Christmas season is the period leading up to Christmas. And part of the reason for that is because we also had to build a shopping season into the Christmas season. And again, that's kind of a 19th century thing. Once we had more goods being produced in factories, a rising middle class who could afford them, things being bought in stores, new avenues for advertising those things through the print media, we start to see all of that taking shape. And then, of course, once you get into New York City at the beginning of the 20th century, large retailers like Gimbel's, Macy's, Wanamaker's, Woolworths had an incentive for seeing that Christmas season extend even farther back. And then we get to the point, again, early 20th century, where the Christmas season, quote unquote, is more or less the period between Thanksgiving and Christmas Day. So probably the biggest difference between Christmas then and now is when we celebrate it. And like I said, Christmas is always changing. I do believe we're in the middle of another change. I think that we're pulling the Christmas season back even further. It's not uncommon now for the day after Halloween for us to start getting into the spirit. The Hallmark Channel starts putting out their countdown to Christmas movies even before Halloween. And I think over the last 10 years with social media and the like, I think people who are inclined to start celebrating earlier are finding validation and community around that idea. And so again, it's all fluid, and I think that's a change that we're actually seeing happen. Will it stick? I don't know. And we often hear about this Christmas creep, where Christmas seems to come earlier and earlier every year, and you have to sort of think and stop and do a little bit of math there, because let's say it comes 3 days earlier every year. It wouldn't be long before we've circled back on ourselves and it's perpetual Christmas, which clearly hasn't happened yet because, surprise, this argument that Christmas comes earlier and earlier every year is also about 150 years old. I did an episode about this last year where I was reading this advertisement from the newspaper saying to get into the stores and shop early and all of that. And then the surprise reveal was that it was from like 1865. So this is an old argument. And no, maybe Christmas is coming earlier. Different parts of Christmas are coming earlier in the year, but no, there's a certain cutoff point. It seems like we can't go farther back than Halloween because that's another big money-making holiday where we need to sort of get past that before we can think of Christmas.
Last year, Connecticut unveiled the Christmas Movie Trail, which includes 22 filming locations from holiday movies that have appeared on Lifetime, Hallmark, and Netflix. And with the huge popularity of Christmas movies and holiday content, including your podcast, do you think that nostalgia plays a role? Is it comfort, escapism, something else? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is one part of Christmas that I wrestle with because it has really taken over the holiday season. If you just Google Christmas news, it's all going to be who's in this movie or what movies are coming up. Like Christmas movies have become such a dominant part of the Christmas season. And it seems like there are basically three different Christmas stories we want told. The story of a couple coming together during the Christmas season. And I actually did an episode about this too. I'm like, if you look at all of the data, the trending data from dating apps, like, Tinder and Match.com and all of that, the Christmas season is the time when nobody is starting a new relationship, right? There's something just so out of place about those stories to begin with. So that's one, the romance story. Then there's the, my crazy family getting together for Christmas, or like someone just, has lost the Christmas spirit and needs to get it back. And that's interesting in its own right, because if you look at Christmas stories throughout history, Christmas stories could be tragedies. Tolstoy has a story called the Lovely Christmas Tree, I want to say, about a child who wakes up next to his mother dead beside him because she froze to death overnight. And then he's just walking around the streets looking for food. The Little Match Girl, too, right? She dies at the end. She freezes to death. There were stories about homecomings and other things like that. It just seems we want the same story told over and over and over again. And I think your question was, what's driving all of that? Is money, right? The Hallmark Channel started putting those things out about 10 years ago. They make most of their revenue during those few weeks out of the year. Others were kind of realizing that they could jump on that train too. And I actually spoke with Alonso Duralde this season for an unrelated episode. We were talking about his new book. But he was saying he's starting to see that we might have reached peak cheesy TV romance Christmas movies. The number actually this year put out by Hallmark is lower than the one last year, whereas before it was climbing every year. So It's hard to say if that's a trend or not. I think it does say something about us. What kind of Christmas stories do we want told during the season? Which ones remind us of Christmas? But I also think it's had the effect of kind of polluting Christmas a little bit, in my opinion. I think it has too much of a presence, so I'd be happy to see it retreat a bit.
Obviously, these movies are definitely making money for these channels, so much so that I think it's Hallmark. They do that Christmas in July where they're showing all these Christmas movies. And, they all kind of follow the same trope. I mean, the big joke is that, it's the story of like the big city executive who moves to the country and falls in love with the local lumberjack and decides that they want a simple life now, or, things like that. And I just wonder if, these stories, do they provide some sort of escapism and comfort, or is it just background noise? Is it, I'm curious, why they are so popular.
Yeah, and I think it's, the stories are sort of the equivalent of vanilla ice cream, right? They're not gonna they're non-controversial. You can watch them with your grandmother. And the thing is, they are written in such a way that in every scene there's some kind of Christmas signifier. Every scene is going to have a Christmas tree or Christmas lights in the background or a cookie baking contest or something like that. And what I'm getting to is I think maybe people aren't necessarily even watching these. These are the things you can kind of have on in the background. You could fall asleep in the middle of one and wake up in the middle of another and basically be no worse for the wear. So they sort of serve that purpose of just being part of the Christmas scenery in a lot of ways, and they're just so bland and conspicuously wholesome that you can just sort of have them on without paying too much attention to it.
Also, going back to your point about the fact that this is quite a stark contrast from, stories from long, long ago, which were almost like horror stories. I mean, people dying, children being whipped. I mean, I think about one story that I learned about was Yule Cat, which absolutely terrifies me. A cat terrorizing naughty children and things like that. And then, I'm thinking also about, the show Stranger Things, for instance. They're releasing episodes over Christmas and over New Year's and whatnot. I'm kind of wondering, I mean, it doesn't take place over Christmas, but I'm kind of wondering if we're going to start to see sort of going back to maybe more of those horror Christmas stories in the future.
And getting rid of that is not even that old. So we talk about the 19th century being basically the watershed where Christmas became what it is. But a lot of those, superstitions and stories of, kids being like, beaten by one of Santa's helpers or kidnapped or all that, those really persisted well into the 20th century. I think we can see another cutoff point right around the World War II era. That's when Christmas really got Disneyfied and Santified and was just all warm and cozy and good vibes and no threats of abuse or consequences or anything like that. So that's still fairly new, right? Which means we might turn the tide yet.
Now, having grown up in New England, and you've experienced many Christmases here, what are some of your favorite regional traditions, events, or sites?
Yeah, so I grew up in Stoughton, which is not too far from, and I'm going to forget if it's North Attleboro, a place called the La Salette Shrine, which we would visit a lot. They do a large outdoor display, and there's a shrine and a chapel there. Lots of memories of doing that when I was younger. And also there is just when I was growing up, we had a Chevrolet Caprice station wagon, the kind with the fake wood paneling on the outside, and you could fit endless people, it would seem, like a dozen or more. And we would just drive around Stoughton, Massachusetts, and other places looking at all of the Christmas light displays. There was even a really nice one in the center of a town called Easton, which had those, cutouts like Santa's workshop and things like that. Um, the church my mother went to was the First United Methodist in Stoughton, and they did a proper Christmas pageant every Christmas that we'd always go to. There would be, songs and all of that, and sometimes even live animals on the stage doing the Christmas story, and we'd all get a candy cane afterward, and there'd be a candlelight vigil. So those things are just indelible in my mind. I think those really left an imprint on me that just shaped, I don't know, my memories and my expectations for what Christmas is and can be.
Well, I know now is your prime season for the podcast. I know that in between seasons, sometimes you'll drop like a special quick episode, but your primary season for Christmas Past typically is Thanksgiving through Christmas. I would love to have people listen to the podcast and learn all about these wonderful stories that you tell. Could you tell our audience a little bit more about how your season works and also where they can find the podcast?
Here and there, as time allows, have a full-time job and a 5-year-old. So when I can, I wish I could put out more than I do, but I put out as much as I can. And I do start right after Halloween, what I call my preseason episodes. Those are all the episodes where I'm interviewing authors about whatever book they have coming out, etc. And then the core season is Thanksgiving to Christmas, where I'm telling you stories about Christmas traditions or events from Christmas history and the like, and sharing all the Christmas memories like you mentioned. So that is happening now. And if you want to find out more, you can go to christmaspastpodcast.com. And as for my book, it is, as they say, available at better booksellers everywhere.
Perfect. I was just about to ask you where people can get a copy of your latest book, which again is titled Of Christmases Long, Long Ago, Surprising Traditions from Christmas Past, as well as your previous book, Christmas Past, The Fascinating Stories Behind Our Favorite Holidays Traditions. Folks, I am going to, of course, link all of this in the show notes, as I said, so make sure you go there and check that out. Brian, thank you so much for taking your valuable time to be on the podcast today and talk to us about your podcast, about your books, your New England Christmas memories, and other fascinating Christmas facts. I really appreciate your time, and I want to wish you and your family the happiest Christmas. Thank you very much again.
You as well. Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Notable New England. And thank you once again to my guest, Brian Earl, for joining me today. It was such a pleasure to talk to him, and I hope that you found the information entertaining and really interesting. I certainly did. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of the holiday season. I want to wish you a happy new year. And I'm going to be back here in the new year, January 4th, to be exact, with a brand new episode of Notable New England. So I hope you'll tune in. Until next time, take care, everybody.